Several countries are moving their citizens and diplomatic staff out of Sudan. Violence there is escalating. Overnight, American forces extracted American diplomats and their families. A Defense Department official says that fewer than 100 people were pulled out of Sudan in what he called a fast and clean operation.
Their exit comes after a week of heavy fighting between rival military factions, and that was despite what was meant to be a 72-hour truce beginning Friday. The World Health Organization reported on Friday that 413 people had been killed, thousands injured since fighting broke out. And obviously, this is also forcing people to flee the country. And information coming out of the country has been limited. I mean, look, it was a success, right? Because U.S. officials say Special Operation Forces, they spent less than an hour on the ground to execute this evacuation of about 100 people, U.S. personnel, and their families. Can you talk to us about what goes into executing such an operation and perhaps how difficult it was to pull it off?
Well, good morning, Amara. Yeah, what this really tells you is the State Department and the Department of Defense are talking with each other. So it starts with good news, right? It wouldn't have been as quick as it took. It took about an hour for the actual evacuation on the ground. But the preparation in advance of that is quite considerable, which means the State Department is getting all the resources that they can together. They're getting the personnel. They're marshaling those folks at a very specific location, maybe a couple of locations. And then DOD is aware of all of that, and then they execute from Djibouti. And with the, as Sam Kiley described, as he understood the operation, they're clearly, based on the kit that they used, helicopters as well as probably some C-130s, there probably was some refueling that needed to take place based on the legs, the distance from Djibouti to Khartoum. But this was incredibly well planned a priori. That's what happens with every embassy. There are these non-combatant evacuation operations. In this particular case, I'd suggest this was permissive, which means the government at least stood aside, the Khartoum government, as disruptive as it was, so the U.S. could get in and get out very quickly.
Yeah, I do want to ask you.
Nobody had to fight their way in, then fight their way out.
Right. And that's obviously why this was so fast and clean, as we heard from U.S. officials. But to that point, what kind of coordination do you think there was with the people there, the militaries on the ground? And we're talking about the Sudan's official army, but also military, but also the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, because the claim was that they coordinated with the U.S. on the evacuation. But of course, you had the State Department saying, actually, no, that's not true at all.
Well, there had to be some effort on the part of the United States to ensure that these combatants were separated. They probably agreed to this separation, or at least they pushed their operations away from where the U.S. had declared they were going to evacuate. I mean, let's be frank. Sudan is already in the midst of a civil war, right? We talk about the imminence of a civil war. This place has been a wreck for years, and it's falling apart right in front of us. So good decision to get those U.S. citizens, those AMCITs out and their family members, which in itself can be incredibly chaotic.
What about the private U.S. citizens? It looks like for now, the U.S. government is saying, look, we can't do anything, sit tight, shelter in place. Do you envision any scenario in which the U.S. will carry out a mass evacuation for those American citizens? I think the estimate was about 16,000, many of them being dual nationals. But do you see a situation where the U.S. would carry out an evacuation for those private citizens?
Yeah, yes, I do. I mean, and when you look at the numbers, I mean, wow, they're incredibly broad. You know, you've got some estimates as few as 500, and then you've got 16,000. But that's not unusual as well, because a lot of AMCITs just don't declare when they get into country, or as you described, dual citizens. Suddenly got a visa, and now they're U.S. citizens. Great, they are U.S. citizens with all the standing, all the privileges that anybody would have. And so there was an obligation on part of the government to try to protect them. So the United States government has made very clear what they can and cannot do, but the possibility exists. And those efforts would, again, possibly require U.S. military and not just commercial departure. So it could be a mess moving forward.
This has to be such a chaotic situation for, all the countries involved, that are trying to get their citizens, their personnel out, right? It includes France and Spain and Turkey. The list is much longer than what I just mentioned, but I understand that the Spanish officials that they have been working to get a quote unquote landing slot and obviously get, assurances on the security situation before they send an Airbus in. But there's no functioning airport right now, at least in Khartoum. So can you talk us through these logistics on how these countries, these foreign governments are going to get their people out?
Well, what you've described is the difference between the United States and many of our friends and partners with the scope of their capabilities. We were able to enter this country. It probably wasn't acknowledged, but we had the capability. We understood what the possibilities were in terms of the aircraft capabilities and the runway capabilities. So the United States planned in great detail. Special Operations Forces do this right. We're able to get in and make sure, and it ended up being permissive, which is great. But you're looking at a lot of nations that don't enjoy that level of competency. And so there will be great competition for runway access and capabilities. That's why nations have to cooperate with each other. And I'm certain, as described earlier, that there probably were some other diplomats that were a part of the U.S. evacuation. Those were declared and those were brought out.
Yeah, it's clearly a race against time as the situation is deteriorating. Major General James Spider Marks, appreciate you joining us. Thank you.